Hiya everyone, happy Easter. Hope you've all had a really good day and not eaten too much chocolate. Big shout outs to absolutely everybody today because it's Easter and I'm hoping you are enjoying yourselves. Right, this is the last story in this book and it's a good one. We've not got any Nelly or anybody else to interrupt us today. Let's see how we get on. This one's called Mr. Phobe's Fear. Not all of the world's worst teachers are villains. Some are just very, very, very bad teachers. This is the story of a very, 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 very bad teacher. A teacher so bad, in fact, that he never even taught. A teacher who doesn't teach? What nonsense is this? Please let me explain. Mr. Phobe was a head teacher. Mr. Phobe was in many ways a model teacher with his rectangular glasses, not too big and not too small moustache, striped club tie, smart grey three-piece suit, matching socks, neatly combed hair, pressed white shirt, pocket square and highly polished shoes. However, Mr. Phobe had a fear, a frightful fear, that made his hair stand up, his teeth chatter, his throat tighten, his stomach churn, hands shake, feet curl, eyes water, ears pop, nostrils flare, elbows burn, hands sweat and his knees knock. It was a fear so huge that when Mr. Phobe was confronted with it, he would scream the school down. Ah! Then he would run and hide. The headmaster had hiding places all over the school, under his desk, in the cleaning cupboard, behind some books on a shelf in the library, up a climbing frame, in the trophy cabinet, inside a tuba, inside the lost property basket, under some smelly socks, pong, under the dinner lady's apron, under a pile of leaves, inside a drawer. Mr. Phobe would do absolutely anything to get away from what terrified him the most. So what was he scared of? Well, I'll tell you. Children. That's right, the headmaster had a terrible fear of children. Children just like you. But how could this be? A teacher scared of children? Surely it's the other way round. Children should be terrified of teachers. Not in this case. Please let me take you back in time 50 years ago to the day when this story begins. It was Mr. Phobe's very first day as a teacher. He was just 21, fresh out of teacher training college and ready to take on the world. Mr. Phobe started as a supply teacher, which is stepping in at a school when one of their teachers is off sick. Little did he know that on his very first day of work, the young Mr. Phobe was being sent to the school with the worst behaved children in the entire world. Hell's Bells School for Horrible Boys. At this school, if it could be called a school, it was more like a boys' prison, one where the prisoners were in charge. The pupils ran riot. There were food fights every lunchtime in the dining hall, running battles in the sports hall, explosions in the science block, football games in the classroom. Paint splashed all over the art room, clumps of wet bog rolls stuck to the ceiling of the toilet, heavy metal blaring from the music room, skateboard races in the corridors, a crocodile that had been borrowed from the local zoo lurking in the pond, food trays used as sledges on the stairs and dinner ladies tied to goalposts. Needless to say, teachers didn't last long at Hell's Bells. The average length of time any of them stayed at the school was 2 days. 2 days were enough to have a teacher running for the hills. The horror! The horror! They would cry as they fled. As well they might. The young Mr. Phobe knew nothing about the terrible reputation of Hell's Bells. All he knew when he woke up in the morning and received the telephone call that he was replacing a Mr. Mildmanner, he was a history teacher who had mysteriously disappeared on a rare Hell's Bells school visit to a medieval castle. That fateful morning, Mr. Phobe marched confidently into the history classroom at Hell's Bells. His shiny new briefcase was swinging in his hand, his rolled-up umbrella was tucked under his arm, and he was humming a happy tune to himself. This was what all those years of hard work at college had been leading up to. Mr. Phobe was now a fully qualified teacher. He was ready to change lives, shape young minds, be a role model to generations of children. The teacher took a deep breath, smiled broadly, and flung open the classroom door. The poor man hadn't even uttered a word when a bucket of custard fell from the top of the door. Now, not only was he covered from head to toe in thick yellow goo, but he had 30 terrors pointing and laughing at him. Ha 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 ha! The Hellsbells boys were startling to behold. It was as if they'd been living wild in a jungle all their lives, having been looked after by a troop of apes. Hair was long and unwashed. Long trousers had been torn into shorts, knees were scabbed, shoes were scuffed, shirts were grubby and ripped, ties were tied round heads, glasses were cracked, blazers had been abandoned, eyes were blackened, teeth were missing. Poor Mr. Phoebe felt like bursting into tears at being coated in custard, but decided it was best not to react. That was exactly what these monsters wanted. To see their latest victim cry or shout or run straight back out of the classroom. So Mr. Phoebe decided to completely ignore what had just happened. He squelched over to the chalkboard, squelch, 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 and turned to face the class. Good morning, he began. No, he thought. His voice had come out all high and wavering because he was nervous. Just then, a toilet plunger zoomed through the air, whiz, and hit him bang on the forehead. The boys rocked with laughter. Ha, ha, ha! Again, Mr. Phoebe chose to ignore this. The new teacher carried on as if it were perfectly normal for him to be about to begin a lesson coated in custard with a toilet plunger stuck to his forehead. Calmly, he put down his briefcase and picked up a piece of chalk. Noticing the blackboard was awash with the rudest words known to man. Plunter, mogwash, boontang, flipper, minky moo, tubal, hoddy boody, wob, pombybot. He quickly rubbed them off. Next, the teacher began chalking his name on the board. But because he was so nervous, his hand was wobbling. Wibble, wobble, wabble. The chalk was tapping against the board. Tip, tap, tap. It was impossible to keep his hands steady. So instead of writing Mr. Phoebe, he actually scrawled something else entirely. Mrs. Phoebe. As soon as Mr. Phoebe turned round and revealed what he'd scrawled on the board, the brutes hooted with laughter again. This was immediately followed by calls of, Good morning, Mrs. Phoebe. Ha ha ha. Being children, they found this hilarious because it sounded a lot like poo. And for some reason, poo is always, always, always funny. Little did Mr. Phoebe know that his ordeal at the hands of the Hellsbells boys was only just beginning. Now, today I'm taking over from Mr. The teacher's nerves were getting the better of him. The poor man couldn't get his words out. Mr. Meatballs, suggested Mungo, the gobbiest kid at the back of the class. No, Mr. Monkey Doo-Doo, asked Dobby, the next gobbiest one near the back of the class. No, Mr. Mardy Bum, said another. No, Mr. Mashed Potato. No, Mr. Minger. Poor Mr. Phoebe couldn't take any more. No! He screamed. It was so loud the walls wobbled. Finally, silence descended upon the classroom for what was the first time in years. It was not to last. For a glorious golden moment, Mr. Phoebe believed he'd finally won their respect. How wrong he was. Whoa! Exclaimed the entire class. Now, come on, settle down, he ordered. On Mungo's prompt, the horrors all repeated exactly what their new supply teacher had just said. Now, come on, settle down, came a chorus of replies. The teacher shook his head and rolled his eyes. This is just stupid. This is just stupid. Stop repeating everything I say. Stop repeating everything I say. Right, that's it. I've had enough. Right, that's it. I've had enough. Mr. Phoebe couldn't take any more. He closed his eyes. As soon as he did, he felt a tomato explode across his face. Whoosh! No one tell him it was me who threw it, hissed a voice at the back. Right you are, Doobie, came a reply. Dull. Mr. Phoebe opened his eyes and began to speak slowly and softly. I want to tell you kids something. I know it's not cool or trendy, but I became a teacher because I want to make the world a better place. You kids are the future. If I can just make one of you the best you can be, then I can give myself a big pat on the back. His voice was growing louder as this speech gathered momentum. So come on, kids, who is with me? Who wants to be the bestest best they can be? Who wants to learn about the Industrial Revolution? All the boys leaped to their feet and burst into applause. In unison they shouted, "Yes!" A proud tear welled in the teacher's eyes. He had turned these beasts around. "Sir," began Mungo, "I think I speak for all of us here by saying thank you from the bottom of our hearts and the hearts of our bottoms for inspiring us." "It is my pleasure," croaked Mr. Phobe. "Let's begin the history lesson. Let's find out about the transference to new manufacturing processes from 1760 to 1840. Let's learn. Let's grow, kids. Let's reach for the stars." "Let's do it," they all replied. "We can't wait to learn about the increasing use of steam and water power, the development of machine tools and the rise of the mechanised factory system," exclaimed Mungo. "Yes," replied Mr. Phobe, punching the air. "Just take a seat, sir, and we can begin." Mungo's grin oozed around the classroom until it had spread across the faces of all the boys. "Kids, let's do this," proclaimed Mr. Phobe, slamming himself down onto his chair. Doof! Instantly, he wished he hadn't. The horrors had covered the seat with hundreds of drawing pins. "Ow!" screamed Mr. Phobe. As well you might if you had hundreds of drawing pins stuck in your bottom. In desperation, the teacher began hopping around the classroom. Hip hop, hippity hop. That didn't work. Neither did jumping, doing, 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 or even cartwheeling, whoosh. All this achieved was to make the brutes howl even louder with laughter. "Ha ha ha ha! It feels like my body is on fire!" cried Mr. Phobe as he charged towards the classroom door. His foot became stuck in an old tin bucket, but he carried on regardless. Clutter, clatter, clutter. "Water! Water!" he cried as he hurried along the corridor. All the terrors followed. Clutching his bottom, Mr. Phobe found the nearest bathroom. He charged inside and found the closest cubicle. With no time to lose, the teacher lifted the seat and plunged his bottom into the bowl. "Ah!" he sighed as the cold water lapped around his burning buttocks. To anyone who might be passing, Mr. Phobe was quite a sight. The teacher was covered from head to toe in custard, with a tomato splattered across his face, a toilet plunger stuck to his forehead and his bottom wedged down the loo. In no time, the swine caught up with him. One by one, their nasty little faces appeared around the door. "Ha ha ha ha!" They all laughed. Mungo shook his head and took charge. "Quiet, boys," he ordered, and they were quiet. "Wonderful speech, Mrs. Phobe." "Thank you," he muttered, trying to make the best of the most undignified position he found himself in. "I'm so sorry this happened, Mrs. Pooh," Mungo continued, clutching his chest to appear even more sincere than he sounded. "That's quite all right, began the teacher. Mungo, I suppose accidents do happen," he continued, trying to put a brave face on things. "But on your first day at Hell's Bells, tut, what rotten luck. How is your bottom now, Mrs. Pooh?" "Still piping hot, I'm afraid. And it's Mr. Phobe." "That's what I said, Mrs. Phobe," replied Mungo, smirking. "Maybe you need some more cold water." "Oh, no, I don't think—" "Let me help, sir." And with that, the boy reached across the teacher and pressed the flush, plonk, splosh. "No!" cried Mr. Phobe. The poor man didn't stand a chance. With his bottom so far down the bowl, the suction from below dragged him downwards. "Whoomph! Help!" he yelled. But it was too late. Mr. Phobe was flushed down the toilet. Kasplunk, whirl, gurgle, gurgle. "Farewell, Mrs. Phobe," called out the monsters. Doobie grinned devilishly, whipped a stopwatch out of his pocket. Mr. Phobe lasted a mere 4 minutes and 17 seconds at the school. That's a new record, exclaimed Mungo. Well done, us! Hooray! Meanwhile, Mr. Phobe was being sucked through a never-ending maze of pipes and tubes. Squish, squash, squish. Finally, with the toilet plunger still stuck to his head, he found himself coming up for air. It was then that Mr. Phobe realised the impossible. Things had taken a turn for the worse. The much worse. He was in a sewage plant. The teacher was swimming in a steaming pool of poo. Pong! No! He cried. From that fateful day forward, Mr. Phobe did everything he possibly could to avoid children at all costs. The safest way, he thought, was to become a headmaster. Then he could hide in his office all day, shuffling his paperwork and not meeting any little horrors. Little horrors just like you. So if one day you see Mr. Phobe locking himself in a locker or diving into a hedge or furiously burying himself on the football pitch, please remember something. It's not his fault he is terrified of children. After all, Mr. Phobe had once been flushed down the toilet. Kersplosh! There you go, guys. End of the book. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you enjoy what's left for your Easter. Don't eat all your chocolate in one go. Make it last. And I will see you again really soon. Stay safe. Bye-bye.